It's time to combine two stories into one. Okay, so it's Sunday. I kind of missed the Saturday segue music resurrection story tag from SNARK Squad. I recently found that from, I think it was Nicole. We were talking about resurrection stories, and I also got an idea to make a video about the books that have changed me. So I thought I would talk about the resurrection stories that come to mind and some of the awesome books that include those. I'll also be getting some help from my handy-dandy book list journal from high school that's got all my summaries from when I finished the books that I read. So the first one that comes to mind is the Halo series by Bungie. Now this isn't a book, this is a video game, but what's great about this universe created by Bungie and a lot of the writers of the books is that the universe is all connected. The canon is all connected. It's not separate. So you can actually play the first video game and be Master Chief with Cortana and go through and do all of the things, destroy Halo and the game, and then pick up where they left off in a book that goes to the second video game, and then you can pick up off on the second video game and keep going and keep going. And the reason I think this is a resurrection story, it's not so much about somebody dying, coming back to life, but it's the idea that kids, when they're young, are stolen by a secret government agency and trained to fight the possibility of some sort of alien warfare in the future, and Master Chief's ability to adapt to that and become a leader that you see in the books as well as in the video games, all the way to the ending of Halo 4, where he finally is stripped of his AI, Cortana, spoiler alert. That's an interesting, because he has spent all that time being a tool for humanity and being seen kind of as a ghost, being seen as somebody that isn't human, somebody that's superhuman. So he's really lifted up and kind of devalued because of the horrible things that the space program has actually done to little kids and trained them. He is stripped of his identity when Cortana disappears, and we have yet to see what happens to him, but apparently Agent Locke is going to find him in Halo 5, so that's definitely coming. But that's one of the first stories I think about when I think about resurrections. I started learning about it in 2000 when the first Halo game came out, and Halo 5 is coming out this year, so it's still a story fresh in my mind all the time. I have this in common with The Lonely Director as well, the zombie stuff. The Walking Dead is another resurrection story that I've just recently finished, with Rick in the season finale beating somebody that he hasn't seen in a long time. It's really interesting to see people have a certain crisis happen to them, and then how they adapt and they cope with that crisis. And see all the different story arcs of people like Michonne and Carol and Daryl and everybody in the story that has survived since the beginning. They're completely different people because they are sort of resurrecting the ego in themselves, or stripping the identity they currently had and trying to form a new one. So resurrection so much doesn't always apply with the idea of zombies dying and coming back to life, even though that's what's really interesting. But it really has to do a lot with the human's identity and the resurrection of the self, and how it can change and be identified with different things, or how people completely strip themselves of their identity and accept all of life that is. Spoiler, hence Morgan's situation in the entire storyline, and his all life is precious line. The other idea, though, which is interesting, that Rick's monologue about them being the Walking Dead, they really are the Walking Dead. It's just that that being is now gone, and it's more of like a virus that is alive more than a human being. That consciousness is no longer there, which is hard to grasp for some of the characters in the show, whether or not they're human. But really, everything's made of the same stuff, so they're trying to survive just like the zombies are. They're just going about it in a much more determined and collaborative way, and trying to survive together and maintain civilization, than sort of succumb to The Walking Dead. The next resurrection series that comes to mind to me is Myra Grant's Newsflesh trilogy, Feed, Deadline, and Blackout, which is another zombie book trilogy that's really good. It takes place a lot of years after the outbreak, and there are a few smaller books written about San Diego Comic-Con and when it happened there, when it happened and occurred. And that's another really, really interesting series. It's funny as hell, too. It's hilarious, the dialogue, but it's sad and all the feels, and there's a lot of character development in it, and there's a lot of just interesting happenings and how people cope with the idea of zombie changing, and there's cloning involved in it, and people remembering themselves, and it's the feels. It deals a lot with how humanity, after decades and decades of the apocalypse, has started to fortify and cut off the zombies and sort of learn to deal with them as part of life and accept it. And that's very, very interesting perspective, because going way forward in time, you have these online communities forming and these people starting to call themselves different labels on the internet because they don't get out of their houses because the zombies are everywhere. A couple more resurrection stories that come to mind are George C. Scott's A Christmas Carol, the idea of that transformation and how he's gone into his past, and he basically gets rid of his ego and he turns on his being. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. It's my favorite. I love that. Beyond Two Souls on the PS3 is another really, really interesting resurrection story of Jodie discovering her past and her actual twin that is attached to her in spirit form and does a whole bunch of crazy sci-fi spiritual resurrection things in the video game, which is very, very fascinating. And then last but not least, I think the Divergent series has a good place on resurrection because of the idea that humanity is breaking down and people are lying about their identity, and then they're like resurrecting the whole idea of humanity because they're starving, but there's not that truth, and there's just a lot of not clarification in that series, but it's very character driven and interesting, and that's just all about identity, and that's very, very fascinating. Resurrection seems, in terms to me, to come from the idea that you're changing who you see yourself as, or some sort of radical truth opens up and compared to what you thought you were before, and that's always fascinating to me. And then last but not least, I have a really, really funny story, a real resurrection story in my life. When I was little, we had this goldfish, and it lived to be about 10 years old. And what happened, this camera is heavy. What happened was, we came home one day and there was only one fish in the bowl, so it obviously ate its counterpart. This thing lived, and its tail grew really thin and really, really wide, and it was a big fish. And one day, it like was dying, and we resurrected it in the water. It was like dead, and we gave it CPR, I think, with like a small bowl of like warm or cold water, and the thing came back to life. So yeah, that's something. Those are my resurrection stories for that tag, and I guess I'll do another book on another video on books that have helped me, because this seemed to have turned into a resurrection themed book tag instead of books that actually have changed my life in some way. I haven't got too much into that discussion and why they've changed me, but I'll definitely think about that a little bit more and make another video about that for Veda. Keep being your awesome self. Don't forget to be awesome, and don't forget to be curious and read. Readers become leaders, and labeling is a lot easier than learning. MattPalka.